Good morning, everybody. We're just going to bring things to a start. My name is SallyAnn Kelly. I'm the Chief Executive from Aberlour. I want to thank everybody for coming along today. I know some of you are pretty far travelled, and I know that some of you were pretty far travelled with no Wi-Fi on the train and know how to plug in your mobile phones. Jim McCormick. I do Twitter. So thanks everybody for coming. This morning is a session that Aberlour have arranged really during Debt Awareness Week to raise the profile of debt that families are facing, public debt in particular, but not exclusively. Because as you all know, and you will have felt either directly or indirectly, the cost of living crisis is biting very significantly in Scotland and across the UK for families. And we see that as an organisation every day in the services that we provide and the support that we provide to families, but also specifically through our Urgent Assistance Fund, which I'm sure a number of you have utilised, where we see families coming to us for the basics, food, clothing for the kids and money for electricity and gas. So I think that families nowadays are faced with significant hurdles and obstacles, and I suppose we have a very clear belief that it's up to those who support families to listen really carefully to what families are telling us and also to bring some solutions to government at a local level and a national level, in the hope that somebody somewhere will listen to what we're saying on behalf of families. And I would acknowledge that there have been changes implemented in Scotland and in bits at a UK level that have helped families, but what we know is that those changes have not gone broad enough and they have not gone deep enough. So what families are telling us is they get support with one hand and it's taken away with another. So today is an opportunity to hear some of the really good work that's been done across Scotland and to have a conversation about what else might we do as a collective to actually bring real pressure to bear. And in Scotland we will have an opportunity to do that. Lots of political change, everybody recognises, but change always brings opportunity. So let's focus on the opportunity that that change brings to have new, different and hopefully more successful conversations about some of the areas that we've not made the inroads in that we would want to. Before I introduce you to Morag, who's going to do a presentation of some of the research that we've been doing alongside Heriot Watt University, I forgot to tell you I'm supposed to do the fire exits are over there. If there is a fire alarm and there isn't one planned, it's for real. So could you move to the fire exits, and the muster point is in the car park. I think you know where the toilets are if you've come in already. So without any other, I think that's all the housekeeping stuff, Martin. Thanks very much. I'm not very good at the housekeeping. So, as you probably appreciate, Aberlour has been involved in anti-poverty work for a number of years, and one of the things that we have done is made a commitment to making sure that we fund research into the impact of poverty on families in Scotland. We work with a range of partners who are in the room today on all of these issues, and we have worked really tirelessly with Morag Treanor from Heriot Watt University, soon to be Glasgow University, and Morag is just completing a 2-year piece of research that we've been doing around the impact of debt on families. So, Morag, without further ado, can I ask you to come up and share some of your insights? Thank you.
Should be you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Need to move this higher? No? Yes? That's all right. That's well, maybe not that high. Thanks. not giant, Martin. Right. So really nice to be here today, and thanks for inviting me. As SallyAnn said, I've been working on the public debt and arrears research with Aberlour now for a couple of years, and indeed working on other research with Aberlour probably for 4 or 5 years. And SallyAnn and I go way back when we worked at Bernardo's together about 15 years ago. So we've got a long history of this type of work and research and poverty work. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through what we've been doing in the different parts of the research, because it's been kind of staged and staggered over the last 2 years. But let me give you a bit of a background first. When we talk about public debts, often what we're really talking about is arrears, repayments for advance payments, and loans, budgeting loans that come from the DWP and need to be repaid. What we're not talking about is commercial levels of debt, such as credit cards. So I suppose the difference for me between these arrears and repayments and overpayments, tax credit overpayments, the difference is the voluntary or involuntary nature of what we're talking about. No one's decided to take on debt to support their lifestyle. What we're looking at is these involuntary enforced debts that come from not having enough income to manage your life and your family. So what we wanted to do was to establish the extent of public debt. How widespread is it? How broad is it? How much is it? What impact does it have on families? And what are their experiences of them and their children in having these debts and arrears? So how we did this was we analysed publicly available data. So I looked at the Scottish Government's data sets on council tax and council tax payments and arrears. I looked at large-scale surveys across Scotland and the UK to see what the extent of people's debt and public debt was across the UK. We did freedom of information requests. I think I did 9 freedom of information requests. I think 4 or 5 were to all 32 local authorities, and 4 or 5 were to the DWP. It has to be said that the DWP are brilliant at responding to FOI requests. They were timely and they had all the information. I was really surprised. Local authorities, not always so good at responding to freedom of information requests. But you can imagine how many mountains of information came back, and we were sieving through that and analysing that. And then, of course, finally speaking to the families and the people who are living every day with the shadows and the threats overhanging them that comes from public debt. One of the first things that we did when we focused down on the FOIs is we realised there was school meal debt. And this is the one that's probably been most publicised. It's the one we started doing a couple of years ago, and it's the one that's been all over the newspapers. But I'll just touch on what we discovered from the school meal debt and where we've got to with that. So in 2002 was when the child tax credits legislation came into place. Child tax credits came out in 2003. In 2002, to have access to free school meals, you needed to be on child tax credits and have an income of just over 13,000, or child tax credits and working tax credits and have an income of just over 5,000. By the time we were doing this research, those thresholds had only increased to just over 16,000 and 7,500. That was over a 20-year period. And I'll show you what the impact of that is in a minute. I notice, actually just looking at that this week, is that those thresholds have increased just in Scotland in the last 6 months. So I'm taking that as a win for Aberlour. We're owning that one, because in the 6 months between June and December, the thresholds have increased. But let me show you what those thresholds mean. This is, on the blue bar is average income as measured by the median in the UK at that point, right? So in 2002, the average income was over 20,000. And in 2023, actually, not 2022, 23, it was 32,300, right? That's the average income. Now, you'll know poverty is 60% of average income. And the threshold in the grey bar for accessing free school meals in 2002 was 65% of average income. So we know the poverty line is 60%. So this means that to get free school meals, you were either the poverty line or up to 5 percentage points above the poverty line. And that was capturing those people who were in employment and working, but on a low income. It was capturing those people that we would call poverty plus a pound, you know. But if you look to now, even with the increased threshold, you're looking at 53% difference. You know, it's 53% is the threshold. Now, if poverty is at 60% of the threshold, then that's 7 percentage points between 53 and 60 are people who are actively living in poverty, that we know are living in poverty, and are not able to access free school meals. And if you want to look at the comparison, it's 12 percentage point difference. So we've got a whole chunk of families who are on low incomes and living in poverty who are not eligible for free school meals under the current system. So that needs to change. What did we find with the Freedom of Information requests is that the free school meal debt across Scotland was just over £1 million. That is a paltry sum for 32 local authorities. It really is paltry. This affected almost 25,000 pupils, and the average debt per pupil or per family was £42. So we're looking at minuscule levels of debt, but that did not stop this being referred to debt collection agencies, going down the legal route, councils going down the legal route for as low as £10. When we asked them what their processes were, sheriff's officers being called and families having charges added to this and being chased. I'd just like to point out that the experiential impact on families is that they're not going to engage with school, and they're not going to go to school meetings, and they're not going to go to parents' evening if they're being chased for debts for food and meals that they can't afford. So it has an impact on a child's engagement with the school and the parents' engagement with the school and a child's ability to be to feel belonging and within the school setting. I mean, I'm sure I don't have to tell you guys that, but I think we do need to get that point across to the people that make the decisions here. What we found as well is that I suspected from looking at the data that there had to be hidden hunger, because what you were seeing is that in secondary schools they were using an online payment system called Parent Pay or iPay, and if you didn't have money to put on that system, your kid doesn't get a school meal, okay? And if you don't have money to give your child each day for the school meal, then your child's going to school unable to access a school meal. So there had to be hidden hunger. And then, lo and behold, this came out of a group work that the Poverty and Inequality Commission were doing with Aberlour that was nothing to do with school meals. This is what young people were telling them about their experiences of poverty. We weren't even asking them about school meals. So for them to say, look, there are kids in our class that aren't able to eat. There are kids in our class that we're sharing what we buy from Greg's at lunchtime, and we're giving them one of our yum-yums, otherwise they won't eat. So this is all stuff that we've been putting into the media. It's been all across the Scottish media, but I'm particularly pleased we got it into The Guardian. And as a Guardian reader, I was quite pleased with that. But I don't know if you've noticed that down south they've really started on the school meal stuff. And I'm taking that as a win as well, because that only happened once we were in The Guardian, I'm sure. So what's happened since then? The thresholds have increased a bit, not high enough, but they've increased a bit. 9 councils, the last time I asked these guys, had written off the school meal debt, which is good, but there's 32 councils in Scotland. COSLA, who's the conventional local authorities that provide guidance to councils, they've produced some quite nice guidance around school meal debt and how to deal with that a bit more sensitively and thoughtfully, so that's good. There's been large donations to Aberlour to help pay off some parents' debt. And practice is changing in some councils, but there really is a lot more to be done. And I think there's really good momentum in Aberlour around this. And I think other organisations are starting to come on board, and there's starting to be more of a UK-wide approach. So I think that's really good. So I think we've been quite successful in what we've managed to do with school meal debt. But school meal debt is such a visceral, emotional thing, isn't it? You're talking about children getting fed. You're talking about feeding the bairns. So when it comes to council tax arrears, which is the next step that we did, it was a wee bit, that's ongoing and a bit different. So again, it was an FOI to all local authorities asking about their council tax arrears. And we couldn't really compare across local authorities because they all answered the Freedom of Information request in different ways. I thought it was clear, but it clearly wasn't clear enough because I got 32 different answers, or maybe they were obfuscating, I don't know. But it wasn't terribly comparable. But what it did show was that it's a big problem. council tax arrears is a big, big problem in Scotland. I was quite shocked that in some places up to 50% of all council tax accounts get a first notice for non-payment, you know. And when I have spoken to COSLA about this and some local authorities, there's very much the presumption that there's a won't pay rather than a can't pay. There really is that presumption that people don't want to pay their council tax and there's refusing to pay their council tax. Some of the collection practices on council tax in Scotland are particularly punitive and particularly bad. For example, the statute of limitations on council tax in Scotland is 20 years. Now in England and Wales it's 6 years. So when I said the first thing I was doing was downloading the Scottish Government's data on council tax to analyse, I was downloading data from 1999, 2000, that tax year. And I thought that's astonishing that I am downloading data from that far back that's still on the books for debt collection by local authorities. That wouldn't happen in England and Wales. So it's quite astonishing to me that it does happen in Scotland. What else were these problems? Within weeks, within 4 weeks, people's council tax arrears could be at a sheriff's officer's. You know, there was very little engagement with people who are the householders. It was straight to sheriff's officers, and once it goes to sheriff's officers, apparently it's a bit of an irreversible process then. There's no negotiating then, there's no saying, okay, I've managed to find some money, I'll pay my council tax bill. It's like, no, it's gone to sheriff's officers, you're too late now. You're now going down a legal route, and a route that now has 10% sheriff's officers charges and other fees added on top. So it's associated with a high level of benefit deductions, a high level of bank account arrestments, and a high level of wage arrestments for those that are in employment. Now, in Scotland, I believe it's been increased to £1,000 maybe, but there's a minimum that you've got to have in your account now before they're allowed to arrest your bank account, which is a good thing. But if you get monthly universal credit payments with your rent as part of that payment, then you will go above that threshold. That's an inevitability. So your bank account will be above the threshold at those points. And as I said before, there is an assumption that people are refusing to pay and that they won't pay rather than they can't pay. So I think it's important here to look to what's happening elsewhere, because there's very much a similar process across every local authority in Scotland. There's not much difference in practice across the local authorities. There seems to be one approach, one size fits all, which surprises me. Because with the school meal debt, there were so many different approaches, but there was one approach to council tax debt. And if we look at another place, this is Gateshead in the northeast of England. They've got a council tax pilot at the moment that's helped 75% of people. And let's think what they did. Instead of seeing it as a way to intervene in a punitive way, what Gateshead Council did was they got a dedicated task force and said, right, where people have got council tax arrears, we want you to go and engage with them and see what's going on in the family and fix whatever problem needs fixed at that point. So it's a really interesting article. If you click on that picture, it will take you to the article because it's really interesting. It's written by the guy from the council. He says, for example, that if they turned up at people's door and they had no food, then it wasn't about the council tax at that point. It was get that family some food, you know, get that sorted. And they did other things. They saw it as a way of a time to intervene and an opportunity to intervene. And it was really quite successful. What did they find? They found that 90% of people in council tax arrears were unable to pay. So they were can't pays, and only 10% were won't pays. And the 10% who were won't pays went back down the debt recovery route, you know, because there will be some people, but it's not the majority. They found it was 10%. And what else did they do? Instead of referring people on to other services and then dropping them, and we know that happens, doesn't it? The referral routes just keep referring. What they did was they went to the organisations that could help and pulled them in, but they kept hold of the person and they kept hold of the family and said, right, let's pull everyone else in that we need rather than the refer and drop model. So by all accounts, it's been really successful, and they've dealt with all the problems that surround a family, because as you know, if they're in council tax arrears, there's a lot more going on, isn't there? So there are ways of doing this. Oh, and it was really successful for debt collection. They actually got money back, more money back doing it this way than they did by going down legal routes and adding fees and involving sheriff's officers. And let's not forget, sheriff's officers is a tens of millions of pounds business in Scotland. Despite the name sheriff's officers, they're not a public body, they're private companies, and they run for private profit. So it's in their interests to continue to do what they do, and to do it fast and to do it punitively. So we're trying to work again on council tax, but it's not such an emotive subject. Councils aren't terribly willing to do much about this, but I think that's why we maybe need to be looking at the national government level, we need to be looking at the Scottish Government level to get some legislation in place that says, why are you chasing people for 20 years rather than the 6 years down south? So moving on to what we did with DWP deductions, this is where we discovered that this was the number of people in Scotland. The blue line, I think, is, let me see, yeah. The blue bars is where people have got one deduction, and the red bars is where people have got multiple deductions. So you're looking at an increase in the number of people in Scotland with these decreases. And again, it clicks onto a report that we did, Aberlour did, that's online, and it shows you every council in Scotland and the Scottish average. So you can see that about 80,000 people are getting DWP deductions from benefits, but local authorities also collect arrears and debts in other ways as well. It's not always through this way. And this one is one that I haven't actually showed Aberlour yet. This was one of my most recent Freedom of Information requests, the one we were talking about men and women, lone parents, couple families, etc. And what this was is the previous Freedom of Information, I asked what's the average amount being taken from people from the DWP and the repayments. So I got an average amount that was a bit of a muchness. And I realised that was masking a lot. It was masking, well, what's the maximum amount you would take from a family? And the question was only asked about people with children. So this doesn't include all the single people who are also getting money taken off. It was just the people with children. And I asked, what's the maximum? And that line across the top is 100% of people's benefits. So you can see that the maximum for people in a lot of those months of those years was their entire benefit amount was the maximum. And that's people with children, because we only asked about people with children. It's a small percentage of people, because if you look at the grey bars, that's the 99th percentile. That means that 99% of people will be up to that amount, and only 1% of people will be above that amount. So 99% of people are around 20 to 30% of their benefits are taken off in these repayments or deductions. But for 1%, and that's probably sanctions at this point, for that 1%, it's up to 100% of their income is taken off them, which is quite astonishing that that is allowed. Let's see where we are. So then I've been speaking to families, and that's the bit that's still ongoing for me. And this is where you pull together what all the data and the stats and the processes, what does that look like for people? What does that mean? It's been really illuminating doing this, because I've discovered some themes that are happening across families, and discovered things I wouldn't have thought of otherwise, and things that opportunities for intervention that I think we need to have, conversations we need to have with probably the Scottish Government. Some of these conversations need to be had, and with local authorities. What are some of the issues? Well, one is the statute of limitations being 20 years rather than 6 years like it is down south. Comparatively, in Scotland for consumer debt, the statute of limitations is 5 years. And in England and Wales, it's 6 years. So the 6-year statute of limitations in England and Wales is standard across all debt. In Scotland, we have a lower statute for consumer debt, credit card debt, it's 5 years. But for public debt, it's 20 years. Housing, huge problem, and a huge reason people get into problems financially, especially people in the private rented sector, where they're spending so much on the rent, they start to slip on other things, such as their council tax. Employment, people having wages arrested, which I'll come on to speak about more about that when I show you some quotes from people. And people's employment changing. So when people lose a job or reduce hours in a job, or disability occurs or illness occurs and something happens in the families and situations change, then the whole system of public monies and public debt doesn't change in a sensitive way with them, and they end up in difficulties and problems. Domestic abuse and financial abuse is really quite huge, and that's something I want to talk about because, for example, if a few of the people I've spoken to, if they've been in a couple relationship and they get into certain types of arrears, say council tax arrears, these debts are jointly and severally liable. What that actually means in practice is that you're both eligible to repay the full amount. It doesn't get split into two if you split up. So what we've got is these situations where arrears and debts of this type have occurred within a couple and the man has moved on, and the woman who still has a tenancy and still has a council tax account is then targeted for the full amount, even if the debt was incurred by a couple. Often, sometimes the debts were incurred in the first place because of financial abuse, and then in the point of separation, the woman's left with the debt. So there's a real problem about a gendered aspect to this, where women are particularly vulnerable to not only being responsible for the entire debt, but obviously because they've still got to keep a roof over children's heads, they're the ones with the tenancy, there's the ones with the council tax, they're easier to track, and they're easier, quite frankly, for the system to pressurise into repayments and even bully, shall we say. Other things that came through very strongly were people's isolation and the lack of support. And sometimes it would be caused by bereavement. Sometimes it would be caused by long-term family disputes. Sometimes what else seems to happen is when people don't have money to do anything, they start to withdraw from friendship groups, and they start to withdraw from family events, and they can't afford to go to that wedding, so everyone falls out with them because they think they're just not turning up to the wedding, or they can't afford to buy presents and people fall out with them, or they can't afford to go out with friends, so friends drop by the wayside because they think you've lost interest in them, and it has a real impact on people's ability to not just socialise, but to be connected and to have people in their lives who might have been able to provide some support. So there was an absolutely astonishing level of lack of support and isolation in this. And this, of course, feeds into and is fed into by people's mental health, worsening mental health situations, people becoming either the situation could have been partly started by mental health issues, but certainly the problems worsened the mental health issues for sure. Isolation worsens the mental health issues. The way the debts are collected or the way the processes work is extremely stressful for people, and even often you've got these automatic letters that trigger some really aggressive processes that are like, oh, sorry, we sent that by mistake, but you've already given someone the fright of their life. And I've talked about the jointly and severally liable. So I've now just got 5 minutes left, and now I've just got some quotes that show you what the situation is here. So this is someone who's telling me that every time you catch a break, this is a man and woman, and the man works and has always worked, but in a privately rented situation, so the rent's high, so got into council tax arrears. And he says they come every September to arrest his wages because it takes about 6 months for the process to occur. And they never get into a conversation that says, what's your income and expenditure? How many children have you got? What can you afford? He says he would have no problem repaying if only he could get into a payment plan. But no one tries to make a payment plan with them. The council don't try to make a payment plan before it gets to sheriff's officers, and sheriff's officers don't try to make a payment plan. They will just arrest your wages. And this man's debt, this is the same man, This man's debt was £8,000, and then by the time he was made bankrupt, it was £21,000. So we're looking at a lot of people's debt being the sheriff's officer's fees and other types of interest that may be on these. The debts, the original debts are often just a fraction of what they have to pay. And he also told me that he also pays, his employer charges him £1.50 a month for the wage arrestment, just to add insult to injury. So housing, again, this is a family renting for 11 years, paying someone else's mortgage for 11 years, and unable to get rehoused by the council, and absolutely convinced that all the debt that he got into with council tax and with gas and electricity occurred because he was paying such a high level of private rental. For someone else, this is a young woman with 4 children, and the situation for her is that her housing is of such poor quality. She's got a wee 5-month-old boy who's twice been in hospital with bronchitis because of the damp and the cold in their house, and yet they're not any priority to be properly housed or adequately housed. And so there's something about the conditions and the housing conditions people are living in and their inability to heat them properly, never mind the effects of the cost of living. So housing does seem to be quite a big thing. When people owe money to the council, they say when they talk to the council have been really good about their arrears. They do get into repayment plans, which is different to the council tax arrears. So some parts of the council are really quite responsive and good, and rent arrears seems to be quite good, and council tax arrears not so good. However, it did still trigger an eviction notice at first, before they went to the council, and they'd already been evicted by the council before and made into homeless accommodation and then rehoused. And so they went to the council and said, well, are you just going to make me homeless again because you'll have to rehouse me again? And they said, oh, sorry, we didn't actually mean to send you that letter, but not before the shock had already occurred to the family. People's employment, people who are worried they're not able to keep their employment because of the impact of the debt. This type of thing is actually stopping people from feeling that they can stay in employment. And because it has an effect on their mental health, which sometimes means that they're off work, or because they've got such an increase in money in their account that it then gets a wage arrestment, and that they can't earn more money, they can't take overtime, for example, because that would trigger something. And the things that people have to do to try and keep a hold of the money they've earned and not let it be taken in wage arrestments, which are really quite high, is quite astonishing. People using food banks. Lockdown had a bad impact on people's employment because either people's employment stopped or people's employment reduced. And even if you were on furlough, you're looking at 80% of your salary. And I've only got a few more minutes, so I'm going to go through these quite quick. And you can get the slides and have a look at them later yourself. Domestic abuse, as I've already mentioned. And this is also, so what's interesting about jointly and severally liable is that this woman, I believe, the joint debts were budgeting loans. Now, at the time, these budgeting loans were taken by her partner without her knowledge, and I believe you can no longer do that. The DWP did change that. It now has to be both people's signatures. So he took out budgeting loans without her knowledge, then they split up, and the DWP do split the debt. So she has to pay half and he has to pay half. And why I think that's really interesting is that it shows that the government on some level realised that if you take out a joint debt, then you should be separately liable for half the debt and not separately liable for the whole debt, which is what has happened in the council tax. So there's a precedence for debt being split here between separating couples. And again, about the isolation. So when you're looking at families being isolated, it usually means their children are isolated too. When I was asking this woman about whether she was isolated, she told me that she was, but that she didn't engage with her friends who have children either because she couldn't do the things that they all wanted to do. So there's a lot of isolation and impacts on people's children. And people saying that, well, what we were talking about earlier, not getting what they're entitled to or having to appeal for what they're entitled to financially. And people asking them, how do you think this is impacting on your children? And they say, I try and not let it impact on my children, but it really does. Mental health, this is not the first time I've done this type of research. In fact, I've been doing this type of research for over 20 years. And the number of, usually women, well, no, everyone in these studies, almost everyone has mental health issues. How they manifest does tend to differ between men and women. I have found over the years, and I found in this study too, the number of women who can't leave the house, who have such high anxiety that they go into panic attacks if they start walking down the street by themselves and have to go back home. And a lot of these women are also isolated because of anxiety and panic attacks. And I think this is something that I have tracked for many years, and it's quite extraordinary. Men also obviously have mental health problems, but they tend to manifest probably more in depression or other types of issues rather than open panic attacks, at least as they report it to me. People not socialising because of their mental health problems. There's the joint liability one. Oh, this one's a cracker. This is a couple who are working. So the man has been working for a long time. He got into the council tax debt together over the years because of the private rental. He got made he got made bankrupt in 2018, and that council tax debt was written off. His wife, in the meantime, has gone to college and has now got a job just this last couple of months. She's now about to have her wages arrested for that historic council tax debt that he was made bankrupt for. Because bankruptcy is not joint. You don't get joint bankruptcy. And bankruptcy for one person does not write off that debt. It writes off that debt for that person. So what they thought it was long gone, and it turns out it's not long gone. It has re-emerged for his wife now that she has a job. And he's just like, you just cannot catch a break. You just cannot get out the bit. We are both working. So it's quite astonishing that this should not, I don't think, be allowed to happen. And that's just more about that. The impacts, is people really feeling this, the stigma around it, saying, I feel like you get treated as subhuman and patronised as well, being asked, why can't you just save some money each month to pay your bills? I mean, people on the phone asking these types of questions. People having to borrow from family, and people sitting with zero in their account until they get money. And often that's because of the other situations in their lives they need support with. So there's very much a lack of care, a lack of understanding in the system, a lack of trying to understand how these things are interconnected. Everything, I'll just flick through, this is about the impacts on children. Everything we're talking about is connected. We know it's connected because you work with families, so you know there's this, and it's all connected. In councils, they're looking at this in isolation. So if there's a school meal debt, they're not saying, is that family in any other debt? Are there problems with rent arrears? Are there problems with council tax arrears? What else do they have? We asked as part of the Freedom of Information how many councils had a multi-debt policy where they looked at the family as an entity and looked at all the debts around the family rather than just look at individual debts. And it was very, very few. So these are things that I think could be changed in council practice. And people saying about the impacts on their children is that, the children are smart, you try and hide it, you sacrifice so much, you don't eat. Quite a lot of the people saying, I don't really eat much myself, I just eat the leftovers or a bit toast here and there. But they still think their children are probably picking up on it, and they have to. And children also saying they don't want to go into town with their friends at the weekend, pretending they don't want to when they just can't, or telling. So it's making children socially isolated too. And you can have those slides and look at them at your leisure later. But that's me. So thanks very much for listening to me. And I hope I haven't thoroughly depressed you. There's lots of opportunities for change and influence here. I can really just identify a few actions that would just change the practice and change the experience for people and make things a lot better. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in what we can do here. And thanks for listening.